Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. Today, we'll be covering a topic, and today's topic is delivering strength and conditioning reports to sports coaches. So if you've joined any kind of Facebook group or LinkedIn group, you see that the topic of reporting comes up periodically. And quite frankly, I think this is probably one component of strength and conditioning that probably is not discussed enough. And as everyone knows, the relationship between the strength coach and the sports coaches is very important. The better that relationship is, obviously, the more doors open, the more successful the athletic program is overall. So a big key to this is obviously to communicate the results and the outcomes taking place in the weight room to the sports coaches, and one way to do that is through delivering reports. So today we're going to talk about how to successfully deliver reports to sports coaches. We're going to talk about 3 specific principles for good reporting, and then we're going to go over some examples of how to do that. So I'm your host for this webinar. My name is Hewitt Tomlin. I am the co-founder of Team Builder. And we're going to go ahead and get started by examining the principles that I just mentioned. So we believe there are 3 good principles to delivering good reports to coaches. And the first principle is presenting data that is easily readable and easily digestible. So there's no one doubts that we can generate massive amounts of data in the weight room, whether it's through the strength and conditioning program, recording things like loads, sets and reps, recording maxes over time, or whether it's through athlete monitoring. We have a lot of opportunities to collect data about our athletes. That being said, presenting all that data does not necessarily mean that it's going to turn into a good report. If you can take all the data sets that you're able to record, and you're able to trim that down into something that is really, really simple, into metrics that represent a larger variety of metrics in a more simple figure, that's obviously the best thing to do. So whenever starting out about what to report, think about all the data you collected and think about ways to trim that down into some specific figures. And sometimes people refer to this as key performance indicators or KPIs. If you could choose 3, 4, or 5 KPIs to communicate to the coaches, that's better than bringing them 10 or 15, because generally speaking, that's too much information in addition to the other types of information that they're recording on their end as well to do a whole lot of stuff with or make decisions based off of. The second principle that we're going to cover is how to incorporate visualization and graphical design. When you collect data, you essentially have a bunch of numbers, and you could put these numbers into an Excel spreadsheet, put them into a table, and you could show this information to a sports coach. However, reading a list of numbers is just not always the most effective way. It's not to say that it doesn't work. If someone takes enough time to read through numbers and understand them and recognize them, then it is helpful, but it's not effective and it's not efficient. Taking data visualization and graphical design is a great way to just communicate some sort of trend, like a graph or a pie chart. These are simple things that you can build in PowerPoint. You can build them in Excel. You could even build them into Google Docs and Google Sheets. Any sort of experience in graphical design will help with taking data sets and communicating them visually. And that's what we consider the second principle of effective reporting. The third principle is to accompany data with actionable insight or outcomes. Once you deliver a report to a coach, can you take that report and then add context? Meaning, can you give a report, and if the coach said, okay, what does this mean? If you could say something as to what it means, how it gives direction, if it addresses anything, even if it's a concern or an accomplishment, that's something that needs to be accompanied with the report. More than likely, if the sports coach and you arrive at the same conclusion based on the report's data, then you're most likely heading in the same direction, and you will tend to agree on the action items that you come up with to kind of advance the agenda. So always, and look, I've seen coaches take a report, print it off from Team Builder, and then pull out a pen and then scribble a few words on each page, maybe next to each athlete's profile. And what that coach is doing is he's basically adding a little bit of insight to the report. He may mention that if this person has a certain result, maybe there's an extra, maybe there's like a circumstantial reason for why that happened, and that would be like an example of context that you would accompany a report with. Another thing you can do is maybe just summarize the report at the end and add like a conclusion statement or a conclusive piece to a report to say that all this basically points towards the fact that our team has gotten stronger, and now it's to the point where we need to focus on, say, dynamic strength, or switch over to some other training outcome, you could say. So those are the three principles that I wanted to mention, and then I wanted to go over some examples. So what to do versus what not to do. So I took a screenshot here of a dashboard. I believe this dashboard was made in Excel. But this is supposed to be an example of what not to do. By no means is this not impressive. This is actually a really impressive dashboard. It seems like it's pulling data from a variety of sources. The graphs are laid out really nicely. But the problem is that there's so much being presented here. A sports coach, like I mentioned earlier, in addition to the other tasks in their workflow, in their day-to-day, this is too much. You want to really avoid using something like this, at least in the context of presenting to a sports coach. If you have a dashboard that has 9 variables in your own workflow, that's fine. That's your full-time job. But when it comes to the sports coach, you may want to choose the top 2 or 3 things that is the most important from this, and then try to present that or condense that into something to show your sports coach. So this next slide is an example of a report that I received from a team builder customer. He's a strength coach at Liberty University. So basically, he has created a one-pager. And this one-pager, as you can see, is broken up into 3 sections. The first one is the body signature. The second one is the movement signature. And then the last portion is actually 2-prong. It's a performance signature and then some sort of readiness visualization. And that's great. You don't need more than 3 to 5 indicators to communicate to a coach. What you could talk about here is quickly the trajectory that the athlete is on in terms of the body signature. That's easy to understand, and you have a visual component with the before and after picture. The movement signature, again, has its own graphs, and we could talk about strengths and weaknesses and then talk about the progressions. And then at the bottom, you can see that there is a graph that shows strength and weaknesses as well. And then we indicate to the coach the specific athlete's readiness score on average, current, and then best all time. Again, nothing that's too heavy on the coach's mind, but the coach can refer to this. If the coach has some sort of notion that the athlete's not doing well, then having an average readiness score can give the coach a benchmark for which to understand where that athlete is today if they were to answer a readiness survey today versus their benchmark. So this is an example of a report that's really well done. Perhaps on a basketball team, there's maybe 15 to 20 athletes on the team, and that would be this certain stack of papers that you would give to the coach. But the key word I wanted to emphasize here is concise. You want to make sure that your report and the data that you're transmitting is concise enough for the coach to understand. If you overload the coach, you're basically communicating that you're doing things, but the coach can't make any decisions based off of that. So if there's one question to ask yourself before you hand a report over to a sports coach is, can a coach make a decision based off of my data? Can they make some sort of actionable determination? If they cannot, then you might have to reform your report to kind of get towards some sort of narrative like that. Is the basic idea here. So with that being said, we're actually going to take a look at Team Builder and talk about what sort of reports in Team Builder can also help deliver this type of what we call efficient reporting to a sports coach. And the report that we like to show is called an assessment report. So an assessment report basically is a report that does a couple of things. It allows a coach to get some sort of data visualization. So we use colors to indicate an athlete's progress. We get to synthesize a lot of information into these few key performance indicators. And these are the things that we just talked about in the webinar. So in this assessment report, what I'll do is I'll choose a group such as football. And then we get to basically take a series of exercises and group them into what we call a tag. So this report is not canned. It's very customizable. And in this case, I'm going to choose 2 tags. I'm going to tag a few exercises as being a lower body exercise, and then I'm going to tag a few exercises as being an upper body exercise. And then when I select these 2 tags for my report, this is what I'll end up getting. I am going to get a list of all the athletes on my team, and then I'm going to get some sort of color code as to how they're progressing in terms of strength for each of the exercises within each tag. And as you can see to the right, I can actually expand each of these components. So the lower body progression for Julius, he's at 88% to his strength goal for this for these exercises. If I expand this, I can see which exercises they are. I can see his current max numbers, and then I could see his goal numbers. So I can actually break down this number into smaller numbers to see what's holding him back and what he's proficient in. In this case, his front squat is holding him back, and that's just a good indication to know. So if I scroll down, I can see that some people who are less proficient in strength show up as yellow. I could open up their expansion for that tag, and I can see that there's a 4 exercise for lower body, and that 2 of them are necessarily holding back Shane, front squat and his back squat. So his squat is weak, and that's what's holding back his lower body strength proficiency. Now, if I look at upper body, you can see that I have exercises as well, but these don't necessarily have to just be lifts. They could be other types of exercises that are based off of number of reps in addition to 1 rep max. So for instance, strict pull-ups, if you have a pull-up count that you want to be a goal and you want to grade strength based off of that, you're welcome to do that. That's what we're doing here with the strict pull-ups. So again, this is an example of a report. This can be exported to Excel. It can be exported as a PDF. So you could quickly export this PDF and then hand it over to a coach, and they would get a color-coded report with everyone's strength proficiency. Now, if you have questions about these numbers, I can answer them now. So again, the exercises are tagged by you as the coach. So if you said, I don't do these exercises, I do other exercises, you could obviously take those exercises in your database and then tag them differently. And you can create many more tags. It's all very customizable. And then as far as the strength goal, coaches input a goal for athletes, or they can allow athletes to input their own goals. So a strength goal is something that's determined by the coach. You could determine it on an individual level. You can actually determine a goal for a position group or even for an entire sport. That's how goal setting works. And then as athletes test with the coach, or as the athletes submit their own numbers, the max number will then be compared to the goal in order to deliver their proficiency inside of this report. When it comes to maxing out, Team Builder allows coaches to manually record max numbers, or you can allow athletes to submit their performance numbers. For instance, if they have a working set, they could type in the weight and the number of reps for the working set, and then Team Builder will formulaically generate a 1 rep max for that athlete. So without even testing on 1RM, you can still get updated numbers on a session-by-session basis for this report. So that kind of concludes our webinar. This is just one example of a few reports that we offer. But again, this is to explain some of those principles that we rely on when it comes to creating reports. And hopefully this will help in your endeavor as you continue to build reports and communicate to sports coaches and other administrators what you have done in the weight room and how you're communicating your results and your outcomes in the weight room as well.